Welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Greek, and we're going to be talking about the diminutive form of a noun in Greek, and specifically looking at Matthew 15:26 to illustrate this. In Matthew 15:26, Jesus says to the Canaanite woman, he says, "It's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." And some translations, a couple at least, Young's Literal Translation says to the little dogs. And sometimes you'll find this in commentaries. They will, let's admit, these are some strong words that Jesus has for this Canaanite woman. And I think in reverence for Christ and in some sense trying to soften these strong words, commentators and others will observe, they'll say, well, the word here for translated dogs or little dogs is kunarios, right? And the normal word for dog is kuon, and they say what we have here is the diminutive form kunarion, right? This is coming from the diminutive form kunarion, and some of you, sometimes this is abbreviated in lexicons, this is like dim or whatever, and I think many people don't really know what that is. This ion is what's called a diminutive ending. It's the most common diminutive ending I think that we find in the New Testament. And a diminutive ending can express affection, it can express smallness, it can express intimacy of some kind, cuteness, smallness, affection, these sorts of ideas. And so commentators are saying, look, this word is a diminutive form, and so it seems to make the statement seem not quite as harsh if Jesus is saying, referencing, say, a house dog as opposed to wild coyote. I don't think that's really the way forward in understanding this passage. There is a reason that almost every major translation just translates this as dogs. Linguistically, the word kunarion is frequently used throughout Greek literature without seeming to have a diminutive sense. And that's something that's true of a lot of diminutives, is that they lose their diminutive sense over time. And so they end up being used interchangeable with the non-diminutive forms. And it seems that the vast majority of English translations have come to that decision and just translated as dogs. Really, the way forward in understanding this is within the context of Matthew. Remember, within the context of Matthew, there's a drama that's playing out, and we know that earlier in the biblical canon, God made a promise to Abraham to bless him and through him to bless all the families of the earth. And then we have Act 2, where the Messiah comes to the Israelite nation and announces himself. Jesus announces salvation to the sons of Abraham, right? In Matthew 10, he sends his disciples only to the lost sheep of Israel. But we know Matthew 28 is coming when the gospel will go to all nations. And so here we have in Matthew chapter 15, right, we have a Canaanite woman who should be in Act 3, right? She should be here as the gospel is going to all nations, but she can't wait. She's pulling back the curtain. Let me in Act 2. My daughter needs help. I need help now. And Jesus tells her, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. It's not right to take the bread from the children and give it to the dogs. That may seem strong to us, but he's saying you're not on the invite list. You're not part of the sons of Abraham. And the woman herself acknowledges. What's she say in response to this? Yes, Lord, yes, you're right. But if I just get to eat the little pieces, the scraps that fall from the table, that will be enough for me. And of course, let's remember, even as we read this section, let's remember what Jesus says to her. He says, great is your faith. Something he never says to his disciples. Remember, he says to them, your faith is small. If you just had the faith the size of a mustard seed, right? And let's remember that it's not till the next chapter even that Peter acknowledges Jesus as the Christ. But here in this section, this woman calls him the Son of David. Right, a Canaanite woman announcing him as the Son of David. And Jesus says, great is your faith. Your request is granted. So I think if we read the passage in context, that helps us understand what's going on. And there's no need to resort to trying to find a diminutive sense here, that most likely has eroded in the use of this word. It's similar. Most Indo-European, if not all Indo-European languages, have diminutive endings. I looked in Smythe's grammar, right? Smythe has a grammar published by Harvard University Press, Herbert Smythe. And if you want to read more about diminutives in Greek, go to sections 852. You can find Smythe's grammar online. I think there's an earlier version of it that's now in the public domain that's free. Sections 852 to 856, he discusses the diminutive in Greek. And several things he points out. He goes through six different diminutive endings, and the most common in New Testament Greek is the ion ending, right? Because we have, for example, pais is child, and then you'll find paidion, sometimes translated little child or dear child, right? That idea of little or dear, that's trying to convey the diminutive sense. Sometimes the diminutive form does have a diminutive sense. But many times, and Smythe observes this as well, the diminutive sense has eroded or been lost over time. Another diminutive ending is iskos. Iskos. And for example, we have the word for servant girl, paidiske, that uses this ending. And there's several other endings that Smythe goes through there as well. Sometimes it helps to think about this in English. So, for example, you have a woman who's named Suzanne, but when she was little, her family called her Susie, right? That ending right there is a diminutive ending in the English language. However, we realize that little Susie will grow up and still be called Susie, even when she's a full-grown lady. And so we realize that diminutives lose their sense even in the course of someone's lifetime when it's used for a name, and that same thing is played out in the Greek language over a period of history when a word loses its diminutive sense.